Ready.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, God save the King. Not words that might be expected from someone brought up to have a healthy scepticism of the role of the hereditary principle in a modern democracy. But if the kind of woeful, unambitious and retrograde legislation that has been announced today is what the new monarch is going to have to put up with for the rest of his reign, then he will need all the divine salvation that he can get. One person who I think can be a bit more confident in their ambition, Mr Deputy Speaker, is my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow Central, who I am absolutely delighted has been selected as the candidate for the redrawn constituency of Glasgow North at the next general election. She has been an outstanding member of this House, and I have every confidence that she will be returned at the next election to continue working with the same passion that she currently does for her constituents and making the case for a fairer, greener, healthier, wealthier and independent Scotland. And that's because it is only independence that can truly deliver the change that Scotland needs to tackle the cost of living crisis and the challenges that face the world today. The cost of living and the cost of energy in particular is the single biggest issue affecting people in Glasgow North right now. Even if inflation rates are going down, that doesn't mean that prices are going down. Prices are still going up. Mortgages and rents, food and grocery bills, car and home insurance, phone and internet costs are all higher today than they were under the previous Prime Minister last year, or indeed the Prime Minister before her. And while every country in the world has had to deal with the consequences of the pandemic, and every country in the world has had to deal with the consequences of the conflict in Ukraine and elsewhere, only the UK has had to deal with the impact of Brexit. A Brexit that 78% of people in Glasgow North voted against, and which none of the Westminster parties is prepared to admit has been anything short of disastrous. And there's nothing in today's announcements that deal with any of this. The government could have announced more energy fuel rebates, mortgage interest rates relief, the kind of action on food prices that has been taken in Ireland. It could have put in place an essentials guarantee so that people definitely have enough to live on, or it could have simply uprated universal credit in line with the recommendations of the UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty. But instead there's silence, a silence echoed on the official opposition's front bench because it's so terrified of doing or saying anything that might frighten people who voted Conservative last time round that their position becomes almost indistinguishable from the Conservatives. The Labour Party used to pride itself on being the party that delivered devolution to Scotland on the second attempt, and 18 years late, mind you. But now they seem to think, like the Conservative Party, that a kind of constitutional perfection has been reached. And Scotland's Parliament now has all the powers it will ever need to continue to be the best wee devolved Parliament in the entire universe. So even though the leader of the Labour Party in Holyrood says that he would love employment law to be devolved to Scotland, a power that was promised as part of the vows that were made to voters in 2014, and a power that would allow the Scottish Government to drive forward workers' rights and protections in Scotland, the position of the Labour Party leader in Westminster is that you'll have had your devolution, and so that's the end of the matter. So neither side will devolve employment law, but today's speech yet again lacks an employment bill. A bill which could protect and enhance the rights of workers to fair hours, fair pay and fair treatment in the workplace. So it will probably fall again to the arcane private members' bill system to try to take forward any improvements. And the same appears to be true for large areas of animal welfare. Scotland is a nation of animal lovers, and while the live export bill announced today is welcome, I hear regularly from constituents who want more action from this government on puppy smuggling, on trophy hunting, on animal testing, all of which could have potentially been dealt with in a wider animal welfare bill with the government's backing. And yet once again we're faced with a year of ad hoc bits and pieces of legislation subject to the whim of members in both houses who happen to turn up on a Friday for private members' bills. And not content with ignoring the welfare of animals, the government seems determined to ignore the basic rights and dignity of some of the poorest and most vulnerable members of our society. Asylum seekers and refugees that I meet in Glasgow North have come here because they have fled conflict or persecution or natural disasters. They've not come here just to seek work. But of course they want to be able to work. They don't want to be told they've got no recourse to public funds and become destitute. They have valuable skills and experience, and they want to put those to use, to earn money and to pay for their own accommodation and pay taxes into the system rather than take resources out. But the Tory government wants to do the opposite of that. It actively wants to spend taxpayers' money, making it more difficult for asylum seekers to make a positive contribution to society and the economy. But like other members, the issue that I've heard most about in recent weeks from constituents in Glasgow North is the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas and the need for an immediate ceasefire. More than 700 emails at the last count, many, if not most, from constituents reaching out for the first time, appalled, horrified, sometimes even traumatised by what they're seeing on the news, especially for those who have friends or family in the region. Thousands of completely innocent children have been killed, by some counts one child for every 10 minutes of the conflict so far, and acts of what can only be described as collective punishment are being inflicted on people in Gaza by the government of Israel. And likewise, there is no justification for the atrocities perpetrated by Hamas, and nor is there any excuse for anti-Semitism in any form. At the end of the day, a lasting settlement can only come about through negotiation and a willingness to come to agreement. And that's why a ceasefire, which means that everybody involved ceases firing, has to be the start. It's not the position of the Prime Minister, it's not the position of the Leader of the Opposition, but it is the position of the UN Secretary-General, the UN General Assembly, the World Health Organization, Oxfam, Amnesty International, Scotland's First Minister, His Holiness Pope Francis, and the many, many, many constituents in Glasgow North who have reached out. They also want to see aid convoys allowed in, people who want to leave to be able to do so, and then legitimate representatives to get round a table and work out a route to peace. Peace, as Pope Paul VI said, is not merely the absence of war based on a precarious balance of power. It is fashioned by efforts directed day after day toward the establishment of the ordered universe willed by God with a more perfect form of justice among men. More succinctly, he said, if you want peace, you must work for justice. But the God that he spoke of is the God that is held to be true by Jews, Muslims and Christians alike. The God who teaches in their holy books that we should treat each other as we ourselves wish to be treated. And in that golden rule of reciprocity lies the route to peace in the Middle East and indeed to peace and justice around the world, in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, in Sudan and in so many other places. We live in a world that is more turbulent and unstable than it seemed even just 8 years ago when many of my colleagues and I were elected to this place. And not all of those challenges can be dealt with by a legislative programme announced from a throne in the House of Lords. But we have to consider how best to play our part. The government's shameful cuts to the aid budget diminished the UK's standing in the world, and it's done lasting damage to countries and communities where programmes have been stopped or scaled back. I know there's a white paper forthcoming and that might stabilise things, but it might not be enough, especially if other policies continue to go in the opposite direction. The way to respond to the climate crisis and the challenge of the energy crisis is not simply to carry on as if nothing is happening. We have to wean ourselves off the oil and fossil fuels that are changing the planet's climate, and we have to invest in clean, green, renewable energy from sources that Scotland has in abundance: wave, wind and, hard though it may be to believe, solar. Investments that can use and develop the skills of our workforce and provide new, well-paying jobs for this and future generations. But the Petroleum Licensing Bill today appears to do just the opposite of that. So at a time when we need to be looking outwards, when we need to be showing leadership on the world stage, the UK Tory government, and sadly their wannabes on the official opposition benches, are increasingly looking inward. Today's speech is largely legislative navel-gazing, trying to cobble together interest and support from wherever it can be found in a desperate attempt to stay in power. If this speech and the official opposition's reaction to it is literally the best that the UK can do, then the UK is frankly no longer fit for purpose, Mr Deputy Speaker. Scotland can and must, and in the end will, do better than this. Independence would give us the powers and the opportunity to tackle the cost of living crisis at home and the climate crisis across the globe. It's time, as the late, great Winnie Ewing said, to stop the world, because Scotland wants to get on.